How about now? Any luck? There we go. Thank you. Thank y'all so much for having me back. I promised you last week was going to be the only uncomfortable week where we had to turn and look at each other. So y'all don't have to look at each other for the next 3 weeks. So y'all can just come in here and we'll have a little dialogue, but the walking into the room and having assigned seats, I appreciated you all being willing to be flexible last week, and I want to talk a little bit more about what we experienced last week. Just show of hands, who was here last week? Okay, so that'll work when we talk about it here in just a little bit. I realized I kind of jumped into things last week because we were in a different environment and my mindset was in a different place, and didn't really do much of an introduction, but just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of snapshot of who I am, where I'm from, and things like that, because Clarksville, Tennessee is actually home for me. It's where I grew up and went to the Madison Street Church of Christ. Now it's Church of Christ at Trenton Crossing. They moved across town and grew up there in a wonderful congregation with a lot of different individuals pouring into me and loving on me. And I was having intergenerational experiences, but I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't until later when I had some language to put on it that I realized what was actually happening and what those experiences could be called and how I could reflect on them. I spent some time at Lipscomb in undergrad and did a Bible degree there. Then I worked with some churches in Australia for a year and have stayed in relationship with them over the years. And then went to Texas to Abilene Christian to do a master's. And then when I graduated in 2010, moved back from Texas to Lebanon, and was intending to be at College Hills Church of Christ for a year. I was going to do kind of a year-long residency, kind of like you would do with medical school, where you would go to school and then have your practice time, so to speak. But that 1-year commitment has turned into an 11-year commitment. So I've been there ever since. Thankfully, they don't call me the resident anymore. I've been there long enough where they actually call me a minister. So I'm the associate minister there and have worked with young adults and small groups and preaching and teaching, and the associate minister job is kind of a jack-of-all-trades role, but I love it. I like the variety and getting to do a lot of different things with the church. And as is the case, the longer you're somewhere, the more opportunities you have. But a few years ago, back in 2013, always a goal of mine was to get my doctorate in whatever field that I ended up in. And the degree that I started working on was what's called a Doctorate of Ministry. And I didn't really know what I wanted to work on or study or write about, but the thing I wanted to do was going to be based in the life of our church. And I ran into some individuals at a conference, and we began talking about church and different things. And this word intergenerational got put on my radar, and I had never heard it before. But someone who is a leading teacher in that field teaches at Lipscomb. And so I talked to her, and we began to brainstorm. And really from 2015 until I finished that next year, my focus, or I guess a priority, rose to the surface related to this whole intergenerational ministry thing. And so since 2015, it's been something that I've tried to implement at our church. I've tried to cultivate different intergenerational rhythms. And what we did last week was just one example of some of the stuff that we've tried at College Hills. In a couple of weeks, on our last night, two Wednesdays from now, we're going to talk about more ideas for what it could look like here at your church. But what I want to do over the next couple of weeks, tonight I want to talk about generations, more specifically generational theory, and I appreciate having pretty much everybody who was in our experience last week here tonight. That's going to enrich some of our conversation. Next week, I want to talk about why intergenerational ministry matters. And then that last week, I want to talk about just some practical ideas. Now, typically, when you hear the word theory, which I said we're going to do some generational theory tonight, everybody's eyes glaze over. But that's why I brought chocolate, to bribe you. So, for those of you who won last week as a part of our friendly competition, I'm going to hand these out here in just a second. But I want to read our passage that we began with last week in Psalm 145. This really beautiful psalm, this intergenerational passage. I want to pray, and then we'll do some candy bribing. So this is from Psalm 145. I will exalt you, my God the King. I will praise your name forever and ever. Every day I will praise and extol your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. His greatness no one can fathom. One generation commends your works to another. They tell of your mighty acts. They speak of the glorious splendor of your majesty, and I will meditate on your wonderful works. They tell of the power of your awesome deeds, and I will proclaim your great deeds. They celebrate your abundant goodness and joyfully sing of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, and rich in love. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. All your works praise you, Lord. Your faithful people extol you. They tell of the glory of your kingdom and speak of your might, so that all people may know of your mighty acts and the glorious splendor of your kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures through all generations. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for this church, for all the generations that you have placed here. And I pray over the next few weeks, you would continue to spark our imagination and enrich our hearts and our minds with ideas and conviction about the kind of church that you're calling us to be. God, I pray that you would bless our time tonight as we think about what it means to be the church through a particular lens, and that you would bless our teaching and our conversation, and that it would be beneficial to those who are here tonight. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So as promised, last week we talked about this intergenerational experience, and I typically don't do that first, but I wanted to try it, because one of the things that happens when you use a big word like intergenerational is people have never heard the word before, and so I wanted you to have an intergenerational experience as we talk about this, so that you'll at least have kind of a stake in the ground moment that you can kind of refer back to, that I think will help these other lessons that I want to do as we flesh out this idea and this concept a little bit more. But like I said, we're going to do a little bribery. But first, who won last week? Are you Connor? Okay, Connor, here's why. I'm kind of jealous, because last week you won, and then tonight I had brought you this delicious chocolate bar. I mean, fantastic. Hershey's, premier stuff. I didn't even bring generic stuff. And then someone walked up to me and brought you a very special prize filled with Snickers bars, because I was told that this is one of your favorites. So I'm going to eat your chocolate bar, and then you get the Snickers. Is that a good, easy, good deal? Okay. So congratulations on winning last week. Who else were our winners? We got one in the back. I'm not going to, I got my 10,000 steps in. So could somebody run these chocolate bars out? Here you go. Now, if you won, who won them last week? Got one in the back, one over here. That's two. And then was there a third one? Connor, did you win twice or just once? Okay. We'll deliver those, and then you get to keep one for being a good servant. All right, so tonight we're going to do a TV edition, okay? So the way we're going to play tonight's game is there's going to be a TV show pop up on the screen, and you're going to hopefully recognize the show. And you're going to need to say two things to win one of these chocolate bars. One, the name of the show, obviously. But two, what decade this particular show started in. And for the sake of time, we're going to jump right into it. So first show, name and year. Y'all put your hands up before I even flip the slide. I may give you a chocolate bar for the enthusiasm. What's the show? I'll give you a shot. Okay. Well, take a shot at a decade. Very good. Coming out strong. Would you deliver that? You get to keep one. That's what those who give shall receive. Very good. That's impressive. Got a feisty competitive group down here in the corner. I love it. All right, so next one. I wanted to give one difficult one. I get this chocolate bar if none of y'all get it. Yes, ma'am. Yes. And very good. Congratulations, 1999. September 22nd. Those first two shows, MASH started on September, congratulations, 17th. And then West Wing started on September 22nd. All right, two more real quick. Well, I don't know. Who was it? Okay, Connor, you dominated last week. So yes, ma'am, you get a chance. No, Connor, you already got your Snickers. You got like 3 or 4 Snickers in there. That's all you get. Yes, ma'am, you got The Office. Do you know what decade this happened in? Not the 80s. Yes, sir. Wait, was your hand up first? Yes, sorry. Y'all can split the chocolate bar. It was the 2000s. Very good. And if you're feeling generous, you can share the chocolate bar, because she did technically get half of the answer. But, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your chocolate. All right, last but not least. I saw right here. Right, but do you know the year? Or the decade, excuse me. Wow, you just went right for it. Yes, sir. Good catch, Connor. Please share. All right. Yeah, that was actually really good. Exact year. You didn't even go for the decade. You went for the bullseyes. Yeah, October 31st. Then we have Tom Selleck, who's timeless, right? This joke worked last year, but I guess not this time. Okay. So, why are we doing this game, and what can we learn from this game? Yes, it is a way for me to bribe you a little bit, because chocolate always is a good way to bribe most people. But there's also a lesson in it, or a few lessons that I want to remind us of. Some of these things are going to sound familiar, because of things that I've alluded to in the past. But I want to remind us that there is kind of a reason why I wanted us to start with this game. Number one, every person is a part of a particular generation. Every person is a part of a particular generation. What is a generation? A generation is a group of people born around the same time. And we'll say a bit more about that in a little bit. Your generation has events and happenings that shape you. So think about when you were born, some of the stuff that was going on during that time. But you could probably also, if you think about those events and happenings, think about how they may have shaped you. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. More specifically, sorry, the formatting's a little bit off. Your church is made of different generations, okay? Now, obviously, we know this. As we look around, not everybody is the same age. But I want tonight to draw attention to that, because I think that if we can begin to just pay attention to that fact, that last point, that not everybody in here is the same age, it will impact the life of your church together, or any church who begins to pay attention to different generations. What I want to do, last but not least, those generations bring particular things and the rest of it to the table. So it's not just that your generation has different viewpoints, opinions, values, etc., but those things are not just things that make us different, but they're things that we can contribute to other generations. They're not just things that we can say, well, this makes us unique, but they can also be gifts that can be given. So the things that make your generation aren't just intended to make you special and different than all the other generations, but it's also hopefully intended for you to then offer that to other generations who may not have had those experiences. So last week, when you came in the room, and I'm really sorry, I don't understand why the formatting is off. But last week when you came into the room, you sat by a particular shape. And I didn't say a lot about those different shapes and those different dates that were assigned to those different shapes. But what we were doing last week was sitting intentionally in an intergenerational environment. By sitting at a table with different people of different generations, you were having an intergenerational experience by just sitting there and talking to those people. So for those who were born between 1901 and 1924, those are individuals typically called the GI generation. Those born between 1925 and 1942 are typically referred to as the silent generation. Those born between 1943 and 1960, the boomer generation. 1961 to 1981, Generation X. 82 to 2003, Millennial Generation. And then 2004 to present, Generation Z. And even today, we are getting close to the end of Generation Z, and so there's a lot of conversation about, well, what about that next generation, who we are really just in the midst of evolving into this kind of next age group. What are we going to call those after Generation Z? Maybe we start all over, just go back to A. Generation A, who knows? But these are kind of categories for us, kind of boxes for us to think about the different age groups within the life of a church. These are a pretty common list of names and breakdown of year when talking about generations in America. Now, depending on who you're talking to, they may call it something different. Sometimes millennials are called Generation Y. Sometimes Generation Z is called like the technology generation. Like, there's different titles, but I like these because they're pretty familiar and common, and they can give us a reference point for talking about different generations. I want to talk a little bit about each generation and some of the things that I have learned from my reading. But what I want to do tonight, just to kind of begin, is I want to hear from you before you hear from me. I want to hear what you have to say about your generation before I kind of offer and share with you some things that other people have observed who kind of study this stuff full time. So I've got my friendly dry erase board up here, and I want to hopefully hear from all generations. So I'm going to make a quick chart real quick. So we'll do Generation Z here. We'll do the Millennial Generation here. I'm going backwards, so it's hard for me to remember what's after. Generation X. So we've got Generation X. Boomer, thank you. I don't know why. Hold on. I did that wrong. Backwards in my head. Oh, I know what I was trying to do. Okay. All right. I knew. So we got Generation, what did I say, Z? We've got Generation Millennial, so that's the key letter. That's what I was trying to do. We got Generation X. We've got Generation Boomers. And then, what else do we have? Remind me. Generation Silent. Do we have a GI generation? Okay. In here tonight? No. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I didn't want to be insensitive to that. So let's start with those who were born between 2000 and today. Who was born between 2000 and today? I kind of gravitated over here. I had a feeling this is where the hands were going to go up. Give me some insight, a word, a characteristic, a trait, something that you think defines your generation. Now, pay attention to how I ask the question before you answer it. Not what necessarily identifies you, because that's the thing about generations we need to pay attention to. These are big trends. These are broad brushstrokes. There's always going to be an exception to the rule. There's always going to be somebody within a generation who's like, that doesn't really describe me. And as we talk about some of these tonight, you're probably going to feel that. You're going to be like, well, that's not really the best description of me. And so there's always going to be that little bit of a difference between the individual and the larger generation. But what we're talking about are, again, broad brushstrokes. Kind of, if you were to zoom out and look at everybody in your generation, what might be some words, phrases, characteristics, or traits that you might use to describe your generation, Generation Z? Weird? Okay, now, one of the things you're going to learn about me is I love a good follow-up question. So, my follow-up question, and you can phone a friend if you need to, is when you say weird, something comes to mind for you. So what about your generation do you think is weird? And be kind, generous, and compassionate. We are in a church building. So what about your generation do you think is weird?
I don't understand why people have to steal soap dispensers from the bathroom.
Oh, stealing soap dispensers from the bathroom. Is that like a thing? Really? That's a trend? Oh, it's a TikTok thing. Okay, good. Good. I'm glad we went off the rails early. Yes, sir. Okay, that's really, really good. That's really, really good. I acknowledge the soap dispenser phenomenon, okay? But since that seems like a newer thing, we're going to zoom out a little bit. And what Connor said was the impact of social media. Now, one more follow-up question. I want to make sure we hear from all the other generations. Social media began, and you don't know a world without social media. You just don't know it. I remember distinctly when I went from college, I graduated. I told my friends, I'm going to try to keep up with you. However, so I had all these phone numbers that I kept in my phone. And then literally the next year, everybody's talking about this Facebook thing. And I'm like, what? And then I get on it, and then more people are on it, more people are on it, more people. I was like, oh, well, this is the way I'm going to stay connected. But like, you all don't remember that moment of we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then we have it. So here's my critical question. So like, let's put on our critical thinking lens. How do you think social media has shaped or impacted your generation? What do you think is like a ripple effect that has had on your generation? Wildcats, yes, sir.
So it creates other challenges like stealing soap out of the...
Okay, it comes back to the soap dispensers. Good.
It creates challenges for stuff like...
Well, no, it's a good point because, okay, so the soap dispenser thing's a TikTok phenomenon. So things that become popular, things that become trendy, things that become kind of attractive is often determined maybe not necessarily by what is on TV or what you might hear, but what you see on social media. And so fads, trends, things like that are significantly shaped for your generation. Now, let me just linger over that real quick. Thank you all. That was really helpful. Thinking about the other generations. So you look in on this dynamic that's happening. You're aware of social media. You may be on social media. But you don't just see social media. You also see how it impacts Generation Z. So would one or two people tell me, how do you think social media, what have you observed, how do you think it impacts and shapes Generation Z? Kind of what's an observation that you make about it? It creates a tremendous amount of social pressure. Okay. So, pressure. There is a study that came out this last week, and it's really interesting because it is about Instagram and anxiety. And specifically, it's about Instagram and female body image. Now, I follow this stuff because of the work that my wife does. She's a therapist, works with women with anxiety and depression. And one of the really interesting things that has come out over the last week, it's a brand new story. Facebook is fully aware. They've said, Facebook and Instagram, same company technically. They are fully aware of the impact it's having on body image in young women. Fully aware. But they're not doing anything about it. And that was really the scandalous news report this last week, is the higher-ups at Facebook, Instagram, fully aware of the impact it's having, the pressure that it's having on young women and on young men, and they're not doing a thing about it. And so it's kind of a little bit of a firestorm. But yeah, very, very important point. So you think about generationally, we've got this entire generation, fads, trends, social pressure, anxiety, depression, are all being impacted by this one very big thing called social media. Just a good thing to be aware of, right? Not to be cynical or to be critical or to be dismissive, but to be like, That's got to be really hard, right? That's got to be really hard for someone to not know any other world than this world that creates a lot of pressure, anxiety, etc. So, cool. Thank you all, and thank you. Let's jump all the way to the other end. Silent generation. Anybody in silent generation here tonight? Yes, ma'am. Would you mind sharing with us maybe a reflection that you have about your generation as a whole? Something that you think, this is a word that I would use to describe who we are. Okay. That's really interesting that you say that. Would you tell me why you say that? That's a great segue. Why does the word followers, or would you say obedient? Do you mind telling me why those were the words that came into your mind? Interesting dynamic. Speaking of, hence the name Silent Generation. One really interesting thing about generations, we've never had an American president from the silent generation, which is indicative of what you've just said, right? Typically followers, typically obedient, typically very much we're going to kind of go with the flow. And so that's kind of a larger trend that people have noticed about this particular generation. Again, I'm sure you can think of people who aren't followers and obedient within that generation, but if you kind of look at it as a whole, that is a part of who this generational makeup is. Generation X. Do we have any Generation Xers in here tonight? Okay. So a few hands here. What do y'all think? What would you say about the generation 1961 to 1981? And you don't have to tell which year you were born, but what would you say about Generation X? Observations, characteristics, traits. Okay. Why do you think that happened? They were born between 1961 and 1981. What might have happened in those early years that would have instilled a spirit of rebellion and independence? Okay, now we're thinking. Now we're doing some critical thinking. A little thing called Woodstock kind of was a big deal, I remember. Not me personally, but from my study. 1960s was a really, really intense decade. A lot of different revolutions, a lot of different protests. So it would only make sense that people who grew up in that world seeing these things happen may have had within them instilled a little bit of an independent, rebellious spirit. Boomer generation, which would be 1943 to 1960. What would you say about your generation? Okay. Talk about that, please. What about television? Why was that what popped into your head? How do you think it impacted that generation to go from, we're going to get our news, we're going to get our entertainment from things like radio, newspaper, to then have this thing called the TV in your home? Like, how do you think that shaped you or impacted you? Okay, so like through that, exposed to more things. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, things like the immediacy of news, which was really just the beginning. Moral standards kind of getting elevated, whether those were standards you agreed with or not. And then finally, Millennial Generation. This is my generation, 1982 to 2003. I know some words that come to my mind, but for the millennials in here, and who are the millennials? Okay. What might be a word or two, characteristics or trait that you would... Yes, sir. Yeah. How do you think that impacted us to have such a? I mean, the rise of the internet has been equated to things like the rise of the printing press. I mean, just something so revolutionary. How do you think that shaped us to have something so significant in our lifetime? Okay. I like what you did there, and that's kind of jumping into number 3 a little bit on those questions. I like that you identified something about our generation or your generation, and didn't just talk about how it made you different, but it also might give you a contact and relatable point to another generation. So, if I had another chocolate bar, I'd give it to you. That was really, really good, a good connection. I do, but that's Connor's that I took from him, so I'm going to eat that one, so I'm not going to give you that one. Yeah, the rise of the internet, and that's a huge shift, so maybe that actually gives us some relatability to these generations on our bookends. Saw some other millennial hands over here. Anything you would add about traits, characteristics, things that make our generation ours? Oh, sorry.
Well, I think you can almost cut our time, at least you can almost cut it in half. Because when I was born, we had computers. So I didn't experience a time before the internet.
Yeah.
So specifically, people that are my age, I think if whoever was it the boomers that were kind of pushing the limits? I think my half of the millennial is kind of even more out on the fringe. Like I think it sways just a little bit.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good point to, we're talking about a 20-year period, and if you were born in the 80s versus you were born in the 90s, even that difference within a generation can be a significant, different experience. If you were, born in the, let me give an example that's relevant and recent. If you were born in 2003 versus if you were born in 2000, simply the fact of being born before 9/11 and after 9/11 has a significant impact on how you view the world. Or let me go back, someone like me, born in the 80s, who remembers a world before 9/11 and what that was like. That is a very different experience that I had versus anyone who was born 2001 beyond. So here you get into a significant world event and how that shaped you. In the same way that sometimes we'll talk about parents and grandparents who grew up during the Great Depression, and then we talk about how that experience of the Great Depression saved them, how the experience of the Great Depression shaped them into even the smallest little things that they would do. Like my grandmother, after she passed away, we found money hidden all through the house, like in books, in coffee cans, in flour, because she had deeply embedded within her this spirit of, I am going to save and I'm going to hold on to things, and I am going to be very conservative with my money. And that shaped her because of those experiences. So yeah, even within a similar demographic, one world event can be significantly shaping. I want to give you a document that we're not going to be able to go through completely tonight. And if I could get some helpers to pass it out. All right, look at those hands. If you'll just pass those out so everybody can get one. This is a document that I passed out the last time I was here. I'm guessing you do not still have that document. If you do, that is not with you. That is impressive, and I appreciate it. But I think in light of our conversation tonight, now that your wheels are turning a little bit about things that happen for you, to you, around you, I find this document really helpful because it kind of gives a summary or condenses together what people who have studied this stuff for a living kind of distill some of the big important points from them. Important observations about these different generations. Now again, broad brushstrokes. You could probably, read through these lists and think, yeah, I wouldn't quite say that, or that's not really me. But at least it begins to give you perception and perspective, kind of a framework to think about. Because I was born at a certain time, that has shaped me in certain ways. And someone who was born before me by a few decades or after me by a few decades is going to have a fundamentally different perception of the world. Yes, ma'am. Amy. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Well, and yes, then that's really helpful to I'm going to say back what I heard you say and tell me if I'm wrong. We're not just paying attention to what happened in my particular generation. It's also helpful to see what happened in the generation before me, because that has a ripple effect inevitably into not just the things that are happening in my generation, but how that generation before me handled it. You brought up a really specific point that I think is really helpful, and it's on this list. But the Generation X was really the first generation to experience a high level of divorces in their life, more so than any generation ever. And because of that, what we find in Generation X, again, trend, broad brushstrokes, is a very suspicious spirit towards things like institutions, right? Because if you grew up in a world where an institution, that of marriage, broke down, if you grew up in a world where you saw things happen in the world that showed you, well, maybe you can't trust the government like we thought we could, then that kind of can instill a spirit of suspicion and mistrust in you. And so one of the things that's often said about that generation, just because you brought it up, is new attitudes on family and marriage, suspicion of authority. If you go down this list, and we're not going to be able to go through it fully tonight, but I want to kind of give you the breakdown so you can take it with you and reflect on it some. What we have are a few different categories. Defining events for that particular generation, values for that particular generation, some communication and work style reflections or themes, strengths of a given generation, and then some general observations about how that particular generation relates to faith, thinks about faith, expresses faith, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know kind of where your eyes gravitate. If I get something like this, I kind of immediately go to mine, because I'm like, what do the experts or the people who have worked on this much longer than I ever have, like, what are they saying about mine? So kind of like give it a look, and I'm just kind of curious of what you see on here that kind of jumps out at you, intrigues you, kind of makes you curious. Is anything? Yes, ma'am. Okay, let me pause you real quick, because you said an important word, and that's really important. She just said, I'm on the cusp. One of the terms in generational theory is the term Cuspers, actually. And so there, yeah. It's all that chocolate kicked in. It's all that, those cocoa beans are going. So there's this actual word called Cusper, which basically someone who is so close to the line between one generation and the next that they very likely could reflect a little bit of both. So I just wanted to stop you because of that word. So keep going, please.
I noticed the strength for the millennials loyal and bought in, and I thought that is totally me. Like, if you can convince me of it, then I'm all in. But you have to really convince me of it. So that stuck out to me.
Why do you think that generation's that way? Or why do you think you're that way?
Well, because I question everything, always. Like, I hate rules, I'm a bad rule follower.
Mm-hmm.
I only follow rules that make sense. If they're stupid, I don't follow them.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been to jail yet. But, I mean, look. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm just so distrustful. And of course, I'm a product of divorce and all the things also. So I don't know. It's just harder to convince me of things. But once you convince me, I'm like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting because as you were saying that, I was also paying attention to what was right next to that, which is hard workers and entrepreneurs. You may have heard phrases like side hustles. Well, the guy who kind of established that term and phrase is a millennial, right? And again, if you grew up in a different generation where you have a certain way of thinking about how you do work, these things about like entrepreneurs working in coffee shops and like having these offices in the back of their house and doing these things called side hustles. Like for some generations, it's like, that doesn't make sense. Are you really working? But if you actually are within that world, like that takes a lot of hard work, the spirit of being an entrepreneur and starting your business and doing something. So I think just even sometimes how these traits play off of each other can create some really interesting dynamics in our world. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any just kind of things that jump out at you as you're looking over these lists, maybe about your generation or another generation?
What is FOMO in Generation?
To someone from generations, I appreciate you saying that. Before I reflect on it,
We actually all had to ask.
you had to ask you. Oh, okay. Fear of missing out. So sometimes people will, and this kind of grows out of this, to go back to social media, one of the dynamics social media creates is just heightened level of awareness. So Friday night, I know what I'm doing because I'm at home and I'm doing it. But then if I pull out my phone, I'm all of a sudden aware of what everyone else is doing in my friend group, whether they're posting their pictures on Instagram, whether they're posted on Facebook or whatever, and you see stuff going on, and all of a sudden you have this kind of like, well, why wasn't I invited? Or maybe I should have gone and done that. Or did I really make the right decision? Or am I so that kind of fear that maybe I'm missing out on something. I think FOMO is very much connected to this social media trend. But again, something like FOMO is a convergence of kind of social influences and social pressure, back what was said earlier, and these kind of internal anxieties and kind of how they play out. So thank you for explaining what that was. But I do want to applaud something, and simply one of the things that happens when we start talking about different generations is there's world events, there are references to significant moments, traits, trends, cultures, and when we're not talking about our generation or our age group, there's often a lot of questions like, what does that word mean? Wait, what was that event? Or wait, what happened with that whole whatever event you want to, Watergate or whatever you come up with? So I just want to say thank you for asking and being curious about another generation, because that's actually one of the very things that we need in our churches who want to move towards a more intergenerational way of being, that there is awareness of who I am and what shaped me, but also a curiosity of like, well, why does that generation kind of move that way or work that way or trend that way? So thank you for asking that. Anybody else, anything else jump out at you or kind of observations that you would make about this list? Yes, ma'am. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean things like, and related to that, my generation, we never had to do active shooter drills at school. We did fire drills and tornado drills. But now, some of the drills that you have to do at school, like, I can't even get my brain around it. And so, even little things like that shape how a whole generation is raised. And so, I appreciate you kind of identifying some of those similarities and differences. Last comment, and then I want to kind of bring things to a close for the sake of time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and how, when you go through that, what does that do? You go through a drill. Why do you do a drill? Because you're preparing yourself for this possibility and this reality, and so all of a sudden it kind of is in your heart and your mind and your imagination, and that's a lot to carry with you on a day-to-day basis, and so that's going to shape a generation in a particular way, and so thank you for sharing that. Here's my real hope for tonight, and we're going to build off of this for next week. Is I simply want us to begin seeing the world with an awareness of generational differences and similarities and the impact that might have on daily life and the life of our churches. To begin seeing the world with an awareness of generational differences and similarities and the impact that might have on daily life and the life of our churches. What I would really hope you would do tonight is you take this sheet of paper with you, and at some point over the next week, find someone of a different generation and just have a dialogue. Is this really true? Is that accurate? Does that describe who you are? Or, yeah, I feel like this is who we are as a generation, and you can share. Just even having that dialogue begins to move towards a certain generational outlook that will impact how we do church together and why it's so important for our churches to be aware of this. Which is the question we're going to wrestle with next week. And so I want to wrap up with a prayer. But next week I want to do is, based upon this way of seeing about the world and thinking about church, why should this even be important for our congregations and your congregation? So let me pray for you. We'll be done tonight, and then we will jump into that question next week. But thank you so much for the conversation and dialogue. I really do appreciate it. Really enriched my experience tonight, and I hope yours as well. God, thank you. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for this evening. I'm grateful for these men and women of all different ages and stages of life, for the wisdom and the insight. I love hearing and learning. I love the spirit of curiosity. I love this small glimpse tonight into how you have created us in very different ways, but also in very similar ways. I continue to pray blessing over this church. I continue to pray as they navigate this very strange season that we're in. I pray that you would give wisdom and discernment to the leaders, but I pray that you would give everyone here a deep sense of love for you and each other. God, I pray your blessing on us as we go home tonight. Keep us safe and bring us back when we're together again on Sunday. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Y'all have a great week. Thank you so much.